Welcome. This is Jesus Hoyos, the CRM Latin America, and today we're going to have another English version of Conversaciones de CRM, CRM Conversations. And today, besides, having Esteban join us, if you remember, Esteban is joining the live streams every other week. And today, we have Craig Dempsey from this Latin Hub. Okay, we'll let him do the introduction relatively quickly. But the topic today will be, the challenges that many of the companies that want to expand in Latin America, especially, companies who are coming from outside Latam, they have when trying to do good customer experience, and the reason for that is because, we're seeing during the pandemic, people are staying home. But at the same time, we're seeing growth and companies expanding, opening offices, and you have companies, expanding into call centers and BPOs and distribution centers because they're doing, the last mile. They're doing e-commerce, they're doing logistics, they're doing distribution, and that requires as well, some level of investment. So I'm going to let Esteban tell us who you are, Esteban.
I'm Esteban Kolsky. I'm the Chief Evangelist for CX for SAP, and I'm an old friend of Jesus who's been trying to help companies expand into Latin America for so many years that it's almost like fun time.
And like Esteban said, he's the Chief Evangelist for SAP, and we have Craig Dempsey that I've been following him the last couple of years. His company helps companies expand in Latam. Craig, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Look, first up, thanks very much for having me. It's obviously an esteemed group that I'm on today. So keeping it very simple, I'm actually Australian, based here in Bogota, Colombia, of all places. Had a former life as an army officer, a mining executive, and an engineering manager. 1st of August 2014, decided to set up a group called the Biz Latin Hub Group, more or less an integrated accounting legal recruitment firm. And we pretty much work with foreign international companies looking to operate within Latin America. So we support them with a variety of things, from understanding the market through to how to go about doing their business, etc. So that's more or less who I am and what we do.
Perfect. So let me put the premise here, and because we, of course, the pandemic is impacting everybody worldwide, and some companies, some small businesses, and some companies are doing relatively well, and those are the companies that have some sort of a monopoly, or they do e-commerce, or they provide distribution, logistics, and per my analysis in Latin America, I see a lot of companies that are expanding because they have to open new distribution centers, or they have e-commerce and they're doing a partnership with a logistic company who are doing the distribution, healthcare, delivery, food distribution, supermarket. They all also are expanding in the call center because they also have to do the delivery, and a lot of big change of restaurants are also expanding into ghost kitchens or distribution centers to distribute the food, and that's happening all over. At the same time, you have companies from overseas that are coming into Latin America, and they're looking for talent. And because the call center is growing, so they're looking at Querétaro, they're looking at Guadalajara, Medellín, Costa Rica, and so on and so on. And at the same time, they're looking to do beyond that what a call center or a BPO will do. They're looking for talent that also will, not only do WhatsApp or in the call center and do all this multi-channel, omni-channel, but be able to manage the last mile, create low-code, no-code applications, be there to expand, and go beyond the traditional customer experience, So And also, the trend that we see here in Latin America, I see a lot of companies letting their employees move from the big cities, and go and work, from where mom and dad, they live, So it's becoming, Latin America is becoming very mobile from that point of view as well. So Craig, how do you see it? What are the trends that you see? Because they impact, everything in terms of customer experience in one sense.
Sure. Look, it's a great question, and obviously from a customer perspective, and what clients and companies expanding the region, what they're seeing. And look, even taking a step back, the region itself over the last 12 to 18 months has gone through a significant change. I think we can all agree on that. And I always look at it like a fire methodology. When a fire goes through a place, it destroys 80% of things in its path. But then there's 20% of things still left standing. And there's no reason or logic behind this, but there's that 20% still standing. And the reason I bring that up is, over the last 12, 18 months, things have been inconsistent. Obviously, you've got the brick and mortar, retail, tourism, and these sorts of businesses have been smashed. But conversely, you've got those, taking advantage of opportunity. And particularly those that are looking to expand to the region, already here, looking to pivot their business model, etc. And obviously, that's having a significant effect on the customer experience and also how they operate. I think you brought up a fantastic point there. Companies are coming down into the region are not just looking to set a small call center and to have those people answering phones. They're actually coming to Latin America nowadays for much more significant talent. Whether they're for SAP, whether they're for Salesforce, whether they're front-end, back-end developers, etc. So what we're seeing is a trend is particularly North American companies coming to Latin America and either in one location or multiple locations, creating what you'd almost call a center of excellence and having these basically hubs where they're hiring these different employees, etc., that plug directly into their US operations. So we're seeing far and far more of that because at the end of the day, they're taking advantage of the human talent that's down here. And coincidentally, we're also seeing in many cases people from the US who are Latino and perhaps returning to Latin America, or alternatively US people deciding to move down to this part of the world, being hired through those models. And I guess I'm sort of deviating on a slight topic here, but there's also a number of other trends that we're seeing. Part of it's associated with COVID, yes, and that's requiring people to work from home and these sorts of relationships. And you're finding employers nowadays, particularly from North America, they're not just looking at hiring somebody from the next county or the next state. They're looking potentially at the next country. So it's opening, I guess, the way in which they attract talent. So that's fantastic. Another thing that we've seen is obviously in recent years, immigration to the US has become more difficult. Okay, so in the past, what you'd find is North American companies would identify talent within the region, and then they would get the visas, etc., and those people relocate to the US. Now what we're seeing instead is they're being recruited and basically in those locations as part of those centers or hubs. And I guess the third thing, which is in itself quite a significant conversation, but I think the last we saw from Bank of America research that 80% of US companies operating in Asia are looking at bringing those operations back to the US. Now, what we'll find in many of those cases is a lot of those companies will decide to actually send it to Latin America as a nearshore option rather than bringing it back to the US. Presents itself a massive opportunity from everything from warehousing, logistics, tech, etc. So, they're the trends that we're seeing. I think Latin America is very well positioned, and obviously it's a little bit inconsistent between the region and the sector. But I think it will be quite an exciting time going forward.
But in all these things that you're seeing, what do you see as the biggest challenge? I mean, if you take the last 10, 100, 1,000 people you talk to, and you have to create a summary of what's the biggest misconception, challenge, or wrong idea that they have about Latin America, what do you say is the biggest problem? From all the people you talk to?
Sure, look, I would put this into two different camps. Okay, you have those that look at Latin America through the prism of a Malaysia or India, etc., and their job is simply to outsource to Latin America. There's a complete difference. At the end of the day, sending work to Latin America is not like sending it to India. It's not like sending it to Malaysia. It's not simply very, very cheap labor that answers phones, etc. It's a very different value proposition. You know, at the end of the day, obviously, you're generally getting a higher educated workforce. It's got similar cultural values. You've got it in the same time zone. You've got language. You know, obviously, Spanish is far more prevalent in North America than many other languages. So you've got that prism. You've got the second prism of people thinking, okay, I know in the US I can create a company in 24 hours, or I can do this and I can, you know, find an easy, you know, I guess bureaucratic system in regards to getting things done. The reality is Latin America does require, and I find it frustrating at times myself, a little bit of patience. You know, the reality is navigating the complexities down here does require support and helping to understand that. I mean, the reality, that's the reason why BizLatin Hub exists. Whilst we can provide those legal and accounting and recruitment services like many other firms, the reality is trying to bridge that gap and understanding to explain a simple thing. Well, I know in the US you're familiar with this, however, down here it's like this. This is the difference, this is what it means. So they're probably the two main frustrations. And I guess what that leads to is a lot of our clients are saying, look, Craig, you know, we want to establish a center of excellence. We want to have 10, 20 developers, whatever it is, let's say in El Salvador, which we have a client right now. You know, we don't want to go through the 5 months of creating a company, then having a problem with bank accounts, etc. So what they're coming to us, is there another way? And what we're working with a lot of clients at the moment is basically hiring them through a professional employer organization model, where effectively we help them find that talent. We then employ it, those people through us, and then effectively we manage the compliance aspects, etc. So it makes it far simpler, where effectively they have plug and play people for their operations without having to deal with the full bureaucracy of the region. You know, they're probably the two main aspects that we see, or frustrations. You know, but the one benefit in normal times, and I even saw some positive news today, you know, you go back 12, 18 months, a lot of our North American clients particularly, you know, they would hop on a plane, come down to the region, and simply by being here, at least for a short period of time, they can really understand. And I did see, I believe, was it over the weekend just gone, there were actually quite positive airline numbers in the US in regards to airline traffic. So who knows, perhaps we're going to a new normal where people will start traveling again. Who knows?
Yeah, we will. I mean, there's no question about that, right? I mean, there's only so long you can be cooped up in one place without going absolutely crazy. And I mean, how's it been down there? What's the main difference between in the US, in Europe? You know, you read on the news every day there's lockdowns, and there's like, you know, the inability to conduct business, and one of the things about Latin America that I know, and I don't want to like, you know, go up the whole time, but it's a lot more sensitive to small changes than it is in the US and in Europe, by being a more sensitive economy, right? So a lockdown in Europe, a lockdown in the US has a certain value that is very different in Latin America. So how has that been? How has the pandemic affected the last few months, or the last year and a half, on the transition to expanding in Latin America?
Sure, look, you know, it's been varied, as you know, across the world in regards to some countries ignoring and pretending it will go away, through to other countries, you know, me being Australian, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, if they have a single case in a city, they close the entire city down. And there are positives and negatives of both approaches. Look, in Latin America, generally speaking, Latin America is a little bit slow to come to grips with it, noting the fact that we didn't have COVID here until well after Europe and even North America, etc. When it did come, most of the countries took a fairly aggressive approach in regards to locking the countries down. There were a few exceptions from that, such as Mexico and Brazil, which perhaps didn't so much, but the rest of the countries did. What we saw from that is, you know, it's obviously disproportionately has affected, you know, poorer people from socioeconomic backgrounds, being the fact that most of them work in service-related industries, etc. So it has led to I guess the side effects of increasing crime and these sorts of things in the different jurisdictions. Okay, I guess from that, and the reality is governments were learning, what they've done sort of after the initial very hard lockdowns is they've gone for more of a hybrid approach where they're locking far smaller areas down or, restricting movements and things, which have been, to be fair, far more sustainable and having significantly less impact on those, those social groups. From a business perspective, we're still seeing, a lot of interest in the region. That interest is probably more centered on the larger economies, which, I guess we'll expect probably have a larger bounce back. Some of the smaller economies are perhaps getting less interest. But, conversely, what we're seeing, the vaccine rollouts across the region have been fairly good in the main and managed much better than most things that you would normally have from government programs down here. So I guess in short, yes, it has hurt the region. It's definitely been inconsistent in regards to countries, but also even socioeconomic backgrounds and even jurisdictions. Obviously, those cities that are affected by tourism have been smashed far more than perhaps capitals, where most things are online. And I guess a positive example, Colombia, they were quite successful in moving a lot of their bureaucratic processes online. Conversely, some jurisdictions like Mexico really haven't. And it's really stalled things. For example, you want to create a company in Mexico, you could be up to 6 months now, just simply to a company. So it's definitely inclined more towards hiring through PEO sort of models. But I'm still positive. The reality is it's a significant market. There are a lot of inefficiencies in the market down here, presenting opportunities for foreign companies to enter the region down here and do business. Conversely, there's a large labour pool that's available. It's becoming harder and harder, particularly in North America, to find that talent. So it's a good opportunity down here. And obviously, not many European or North American companies are really looking towards Asia anymore.
Yeah, last year I had the chance to, in one of these live streams, I had Alan Talaveras. He's the CMO of Bank of Puerto Rico, and he created, an ecosystem, an e-commerce ecosystem that, he's doing Bank of Mexico, Bank of Dominican Republic, and other countries. And during the pandemic, he noticed that, besides he was growing because, people from the United States and local in Puerto Rico, they were buying through his e-commerce. And he's helping the small businesses, he noticed that a lot of the brick and mortar companies from Puerto Rico were going to him to tell him, hey, could you set up my e-commerce site? Because I don't have the resources, the time, or the technology. And these people don't even have, the know-how, or they don't even have a CIO or any IT department, And I started to think about that when I read your article that you wrote the other day in New York Americas about, the tech companies expanding in Latin America. And I see, I see two trends, the brick and mortar companies in Latin America that they're like, I still have to wait and see. I don't want to do my digital transformation, and if they do something, they're going to have a bunch of challenges trying to deploy a good customer experience. And then you have all these companies, tech companies, especially the fintechs, who are expanding into open banking, or they're putting a deal together with the local bank, or they're working together with any e-commerce site to provide many options to do local payment. Do you see that in Latin America, and what are the challenges, all these startups, tech companies versus the brick and mortars to try to do CX? And let me clarify here, CX doesn't mean that a tech company is going to implement WhatsApp to do customer service, because that's a trend. Everybody needs to have WhatsApp, but that doesn't mean that, having WhatsApp, even if you're a company from overseas in Latin America or locally, that you implement WhatsApp, you're doing customer experience, because that's not the case. So I just want to throw that out just in case.
Yeah, look, obviously there's obviously those who are keeping up with the game and those who are going to die with the game, so to speak. At the end of the day, there's a lot of brick and mortar businesses that effectively are choosing not to change and realistically just hoping that things will eventually return to how they were. Of course, there will be some people that will return to those brick and mortar stores because, particularly for discretionary buys, those things that make you happy, like buying clothes, buying shoes or whatever, people are always going to go do that, that actual in-shop purchase. But, those looking for online and that customer experience, and particularly those bringing fintech, etc., that is pretty much where the future will go. And those companies that can evolve with that, adapt and overcome, will see that improvement. One of the bigger issues you have, and, we are inundated with fintech companies basically wanting to enter the region. As I mentioned before, there's a large inefficiencies down here in the marketplace. And anything that can improve customer experience and reduce cost is going to do well regardless of the time. Now, one of the issues that these companies are facing is particularly fintech is associated or linked to the banks. And the banking sector is very, very tightly controlled and regulated within the region. And to be fair, most of the banking systems are owned, by old money within the region, and has quite strong lobby groups and things behind it. So we find it somewhat difficult for some of these, let's say, micro lenders, payment platforms, etc., to enter the region. However, those with some level of persistence and just simply by the volume and the number that are entering the region at the moment, things will change and will present great opportunities. As I always speak to people and say, look, I understand it's going to be a bit complicated to get into the market, but you've got to think that's an advantage because once you're in, a competitor has to go through that same process. So it gives you first mover advantage. The reality is there is a focus on customer experience down here. It will improve. But conversely, because of where it stands at the moment, I think there's significant opportunity for those companies from outside that can bring that technology, bring that new way of thinking, and simply at the end of the day, reduce cost, have a better customer experience, and have return customers are going to be successful.
Sorry, go ahead.
All yours.
I was going to say, what are the terms when you have that conversation with customers and you say, look, I know you're working on customer experience, but we're missing XYZ, and there's a company that's coming from the outside that can help with that, and there's a company that has this value proposition, right? What's the conversation like? I mean, is there like a good reception? Is there like I know I grew up in Latin America. I know that we have a love-hate relationship with anybody who's not Latino, right? it's the way it is. We are especially in Buenos Aires, we are the best in the world.
Yeah.
So, but how do those conversations go? And bringing value from the outside to foment a stronger CX perspective in the region.
Sure. Look, and I guess the first thing to take a step back from that, trying to generalize Latin America as all the one thing, is in itself. Because, quite frankly, Argentines are very unique in their own way compared to Brazilians or Mexicans, etc. So, whilst you can perhaps, in some ways, put areas together and perhaps more like-minded thinking, at the end of the day, it's like saying everyone in Asia is the same. Obviously, it's something. So that's one of the things that, that's the first part of the conversation. And it's also the same as, look, there's this company that has this new product or service trying to say, they're from the US or from UK or even from Denmark in itself is actually a different value proposition as well because they have a different way of thinking. This is actually one of the strengths of particularly North American companies or US companies. US companies do, almost every person in the US knows someone that's a Latino, has a Latino friend, has a cousin, brother, whatever it is. So people in the US do seem to have a much better understanding, appreciation of Latin America than perhaps someone from the UK or France, etc. So I find that's also always an important thing. But in general, when you approach these companies, to be fair, most companies, particularly at the more senior levels, do have an interest to get best practice. They do have an interest in, bringing foreign and international things to improve. Okay, so there is that general interest in it. To be fair, what seems to be a bigger inhibitor is more on a regulation level and I guess government level. there are some governments, and I'll be slightly politically correct here, some governments that are a little bit more pro supporting foreign business entering the region with products and services than some other jurisdictions. Obviously, that in itself can, for various reasons, but that in itself can affect, whether something is feasible or not.
Yeah, one of the things that, because I know that there's many, software companies, who are expanding in the region, but not because they're selling, they're expanding because they're, implementing their, the global operational support, and I see that a lot, in Mexico, I see that in Costa Rica, I see that in Panama. And in order to expand, the customer experience, and be able to provide, that, multilingual, highly educated person, because the higher education market in Latin America, is growing even with the pandemic. That's a market that I help a lot, in terms of analysis and help implement, customer experience systems, and there's a big competition, of educating people, at all levels, and from especially when you have to meet all these regulations and certifications, that you need to put in place. And I was wondering, with the pandemic, companies are trying to open business in Latin America, if they're really looking into that. Because it's one thing to look, because that employee or that consultant, that resource might be cheaper, but are they looking at the whole equation, because they really need to do CX, whatever they do CX, if they have customers in Spain, or they have customers in Australia, United States, they want to be sure that they have everything well put together, right technology and everything, or just I'm just going to find people and I'm going to use my own technology. Have you seen that?
Sure. So what a lot of our clients are looking for, to be fair, is they're looking to augment their existing customer experience systems and processes. So in many cases, they're not looking to come down here and create something. They're looking for, let's say, arms and legs that can plug into their existing system and augment that capacity. Which is what we're seeing. And in many cases, a simple example, you have Endava, that is quite a tech company out of the UK. They came to Bogota and went to hire, I think, about 1,000 people in the tech space. As you can appreciate, they struggled to find that, so they had to start going to secondary cities. So what we're seeing more and more is, particularly those North American companies, they're actually not necessarily looking at Argentina or Chile or Colombia anymore. They're actually looking at Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala. They're looking at those smaller countries to see if they can find that talent that isn't being sought after at the moment, and trying to plug that into their existing California or Silicon Valley or whatever operations to ensure that customer experience. So that's very much what they're doing. As part of that, obviously, they're investing a lot in training these people, educating these people. So, in the long run, it will actually significantly enhance the local capabilities here. And what I expect is, with those enhanced capabilities and people with far more knowledge and expertise, you'll actually find that within itself will almost create a renaissance of, new startups and ventures and tech coming out of some of these, unknown regions, so to speak.
I like that Renaissance concept because, again, having been in the region over the last 50 plus years, right, at different levels and different participation levels, I see a sense of where when I was younger and growing up in Argentina, we had this sense that, everything that came from abroad was better, right? And then Brazil took a stance against that by not privatizing everything and not bringing anything in, which was one extreme, right? But I like the idea that most countries actually found a way to balance what comes from the outside with the value built inside.
Yeah,
are you seeing? Yeah.
I said what at the moment, North America or Europe or whatever is looking at Latin America for human talent, arms and legs, plugging into their existing capability. With time, it will evolve from arms and legs to its own independent capability. And then, of course, some of those people will eventually leave. They will then create the next Rappi, the next Amazon, or whatever the case may be. So what we're finding almost this is like the beginning of, basically enhancing that local capability. So I see this as from a longer term point of view, from investment. I see this creating these little Silicon Valleys, particularly in those, those jurisdictions and regions that, have once been forgotten. Like, I'm sure no one's really, talked in Silicon Valley about going to El Salvador for tech talent. But I can tell you right now, we're working with a client for exactly that right now. And conversely, in Guatemala, another jurisdiction. So, they're shying away a bit from the larger ones because at the moment, most of the best talent's already been taken by the Amazons, the Microsofts, and everybody else already. So these smaller jurisdictions, I think, will be a place to watch as the years come.
Yeah, when you travel to San Jose, you leave the airport towards the city. You see all these Amazon, Microsoft, logos everywhere, IBM and so on and so on. So, I for a moment I thought that it was in San Jose, California, not San Jose, Costa Rica. Up and coming place to be. So who is investing? Who's expanding Latin America? What industries? Which countries are looking to expand in the region?
Look, the main one that we're seeing is the US. Okay, that's expanding in the region when it comes to a tech space. Why? Because as I said, going back, there was, okay, perfect. We're going to look for tech talent. We're going to Malaysia. We're going to India. We're going to Asia. This has stopped. Companies are now looking, well, actually, all those benefits that we're supposed to get from this offshoring, etc., just never really came to fruition. And the fact that there's a cultural difference, there's a time zone difference, etc. So now they're saying, well, actually, let's look towards Latin America, which can augment our existing team in the time zone, culture, language, etc. So it's a much better fit. So we're seeing a lot, particularly from the US, in the tech space that's going down here. In regards to other industries and other sectors, we're still seeing a lot, from Canada, particularly in, the cannabis and the mining space, through particularly UK. As part of Brexit, they're looking for a lot of, sales of products and services, and particularly logistics and stuff in the region as well. So, there's still a lot of interest in the region, but from a tech focus point of view, it's definitely being led by the US.
Well, let me throw out a couple of terms for you both, Esteban and Craig. Innovation, the new normal. Digital transformation, CX, customer engagement, call center outsourcing, BPO. Are companies in Latin America, whoever they're expanding locally or international, are they doing this because of the pandemic, or they're doing this because they truly want to provide the best customer experience, or are they doing this because the reality is that every day in Latin America we have to reduce costs?
Well, look, great question. I put it very, very simple at the end of the day. Companies are doing this because they don't really have a choice. At the end of the day, they've got to offer the best customer experience. And of course, cost is always a consideration. So if they find they can come up with a solution to at least maintain or improve the customer experience and control cost, that is what's driving motives. At the end of the day, business is about making money, and of course, trying to do it in a sustainable and equitable way, etc. The reality is, that it's been done for survival. And those that don't evolve, innovate, and evolve will eventually die, which is what we've seen from the brick and mortar stores, which decided not to, and a thing of the past now, aren't they?
No.
Yeah, but you also need to. Blaming the pandemic is kind of like outdated already, right? It's one of those trends that came and went really quick. But there's better ways to look at it, and I think that this is the part where I love your opinion, Craig. But like Gardner looks at it as like the deviation from normal created opportunities for expansion and reduction, right? And opportunity for expansion is things that work well, during the pandemic can be scaled up and could be improved and adopted as permanent, and things that didn't work well then could be reduced and maybe in some places like disposed of, right? So are you seeing something similar even before or since, right? I mean, regardless of the pandemic, are you seeing a sense of business transformation in Latin America for expansion or reduction, essentially, or is it more like just survival?
Look, at the end of the day, I think what's happening in the business environment was going to happen in any case. All that we've seen because of the pandemic is a lot of those things have been accelerated. So we've compressed things because, we've basically compressed, how the timeline between a person looking for services or products going to a physical location, and that has changed to virtual almost overnight. Now, that was always going that way since the internet was created. However, what we've seen is that has evolved. The customer experience, in many ways, has not kept up with that, I guess, rapid change. So businesses now are looking at, well, how now do I ensure my customer can still get that service, get that product, have the experience that they had before? Obviously there's been, those like Zoom. The reality is that was barely even known before the pandemic, and now is everywhere. And even Zoom itself is evolving, trying to keep up and be relevant because, what's going to become the new normal after all this? And even what the new normal is, I suspect will actually be different in North America, for example, than it is in South America. The reality is, I think it was, according to Forbes, 91% of people in the US anyway were hoping to go to a hybrid solution between working in the office and working at home post-pandemic. Whereas in Latin America, I would suspect the vast majority of businesses will return back to the office. In the vast majority. Why? Just from a cultural perspective. Obviously Latin America itself, has a very, very strong bonds in family and friend, etc., and does really value that human interaction and connection, which we spend more of our time working in the office than anything else. So, I can see, that trend continuing back towards the office, perhaps stronger in some regions than others.
And I would like to add to that because there has to be a balance, because sometimes it will take me 2 hours to be in traffic in Mexico City and San Paulo, Bogota, just to get to where we work. In my other company, we used to be hybrid the last 20 years. We have people in Bucaramanga, we have people in Costa Rica, we have people in different places in Mexico, and so on and so on. And we use talent, we use global talent to deploy our solutions. So, but at the other side, the challenge that I see, are the call centers or the offices that people want to work in a hybrid mode, but they don't have the facilities in the house because, we are a multi-household, we have multi-household homes, in Latin America, we live with grandma, with grandpa, my mother, the dad, the uncle, and that's part of Latin America as well. So that balance as well needs to change. So I probably see, companies in Latin America, and going back to what you were saying that, they have to change because they have to. They have to change because they have to, and they have to change the way they do business, And I think that's the challenge that a lot of companies are going to have in order to compete globally, period. Because a local company who has an e-commerce site, it's going to compete with the Walmarts and the Amazons in Mexico City, and that's going to be, and I like what Rappi is doing. Rappi is evolving in terms of becoming, more than a delivery application because they're evolving, they're becoming agile. So, and I see that as well. So a couple of the call centers and BPOs out there who are, come use my BPO, but not just to do the traditional phone call and BPO services. We're going to give you highly educated people to do development work, so they know your culture. They can do local, no-code applications and, and RPA and, a think tank to do AR and, and do, artificial intelligence. So I see that as a challenge. And I still believe, companies in Latin America and whoever is going to bring that into Latin America, they have to change that shape. But at the same time, going back to, Latinos who are, they are here in Miami, I came across probably 5 people in the last, 3 or 4 weeks that they want to go back to Mexico, not because of the money, because they want to say Mexico, outside Mexico City, and, the Chinese have a good internet like everybody else, and that that applies here in the state as well. So how do you see companies investing in the infrastructure to be sure in this hybrid model they have the technology, they have the Zooms, the Teams, the internet, to be able to communicate, locally and globally?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question, and even a challenge that we faced ourselves at BizLatin Hub in regards to having sufficient servers and capacity, etc., for people working from home. And I know from us, we had to invest in new technology, etc., to allow that to happen. But there's a fine line here because, on one hand, you have government regulation, and there are some jurisdictions that have come out with specific legislation that says if you have an employee working from home, this is what you must provide, such as you must provide a working desk, a working chair, etc., etc. So you have the government regulation side that companies need to be considerate of. Then conversely, you've got those companies that need to really invest, firstly, in the physical stuff to actually allow them to log on and do that stuff, which is one complication. Secondly, internet, depending on the types of employees, etc., can be a problem. So some companies I know are actually giving out mobile internet devices, etc., or even phones, and they can use them on using that. But then you've also got the second issue of, okay, having this decentralized workforce, how are we going to manage that? It's all fantastic to have all these people, but it's a far more of a managerial challenge managing a dispersed workforce. Now, if it's 3 or 4 people, fine, but if you have 300 people, it's more difficult. So I can see there still being a need for these people going to a central location, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, whatever works out for the company. There is still going to be that interaction because it can't be replaced. I have a friend that has a large English institute here in Colombia, and even they've decided, well, we actually don't need to have a workplace anymore. We just need to have a meeting space for the team to come and meet at a certain time each week. So we're going towards that model where the human interaction will exist, supported with infrastructure that you can work from more locations. For example, changing PCs to laptops is an obvious one, for example. Now, conversely, we've engaged with some call centers that have this exact problem because they've said, okay, employees work from home, but now you need to have this massive PC and you've got to have all this other equipment to take home with you. Well, how does that actually comply with some of these privacy laws like GDPR, etc.? And California has some very strong privacy laws. How does that mean? How do we ensure that your home, that client information will retain private? So it's also opening up a lot of complications in regards to client confidentiality, privacy of information, etc. So, there are going to be some interesting discussions as the time moves forward on how some of these challenges are overcome. I think, to be fair, we're just beginning these conversations more than ending them.
So, data privacy, compliance, data security, cybersecurity is going to be a constant challenge for anybody, period,
Yeah, but it's only augmented in places like Latin America where this is something that Craig said earlier that is one of the biggest issues, I believe, which is like people think of Latin America as one block when in reality you have 30 plus countries and 5 to 10, 15, 20 regions within each country, and they all operate and work differently. And cybersecurity and privacy are two issues that, everywhere in the world are dramatic, but within Latin America, the difference between what you get in one country versus the next one, even in regions within the countries, it's just incredibly dramatic. So those extremes is what actually creates a huge challenge in addressing Latin America as a monolith versus being, and Jesus, last year you tried to start the company with the name, was it 32 and counting or 33 and counting? Counting the number of countries only without even considering that each country had many regions and many different aspects, right? So that to me is like it's the biggest challenge that we see in approaching Latin America, is that it's so diverse and so complex that to create a customer experience model for that is almost impossible, right? And that brings that's a huge challenge.
Well, I'm sorry. And based on that, I guess my biggest takeaway, is that you mentioned, El Salvador and Guatemala, that you're looking for talent, people are looking for, to set up shop over there. And ironically, from the political point of view, I mean, those are the countries that we're having the problems, at the border, here in the States, so there's two sides to every story. But I like the fact, and I think, all governments, and companies, I think probably, they have to invest, that locally, because, it makes sense definitely, to avoid all that complexity, all those challenges, to focus on those small regions, small places, to start, putting, the foot in the door, setting up your blueprint in order to grow in the region. So that's my biggest takeaway. So based on the conversation today here, Craig, that's how you see as well.
Yeah, look, I guess just sort of summing things up. Look, the reality is Latin America, is a great region, but it's broken down by many, many small parts. And whilst there is a common language, more or less, other than Portuguese, for Brazil and a little bit of English on the coast, there is a lot of talent there, and it's accessible. It's just a matter of taking that talent and harnessing it to ensure that you've got a synchronized customer sort of solution there, and you ensure that experience is maintained and hopefully improved upon. But from my perspective, I suspect that we'll see more and more interesting growth, particularly as North America looks for alternatives to Asia, and I think Latin America is very well positioned. One of the things Latin America perhaps has inconsistently done is some countries have been very good at promoting themselves as jurisdictions of choice, where conversely, you've mentioned El Salvador and Guatemala. Realistically, both of those jurisdictions, all you ever hear about in the US is border crossings. Nothing about opportunities there, but that. Because some countries have been better than others in regards to messaging. I think the future of Latin America anyway is at some point they will harmonize to some extent some of the rules and regulations between the different jurisdictions. But I think that's time away.
Well, and that a little bit brings the issue of the Cono Sur, right, versus like the EU and the attempt to create a common market that didn't really work quite as expected. I don't ever expect to see a Cono Sur, being like equal to the EU. It's more like an NAFTA model that is a EU, but that would be a fantastic way to actually create some homogeneity within Latin America and some better model for business to enter the region, which is to create a common market, right? I mean, do you see companies understanding the Cono Sur and trying to leverage that, or it's just mostly internal to the Latin America operations?
Look, there is a significant frustration by companies operating in the region. Look, we specialize in working with clients across multiple jurisdictions. That's what we specialize in. We have offices in pretty much every major economy in the region. And where the main frustration is operating between borders. Okay. And often, as you can appreciate, clients want to move money or products or services between the jurisdictions. And a lot of it is very, very inefficient. It's not even the rules and regulations, it's just very, very inefficient. And yes,
unless you're in Paraguay, but yeah.
Well, that's another thing itself. But yes, so the reality is, with time, it will definitely never become an EU of sorts. But I think there is a general acceptance in the region that with time they do need to try to harmonize a little bit better from a tax point of view, from a trade point of view, etc. To make these products and services a little bit more expandable. What we see is many clients that want to do things, and when they're not expandable, what we find is clients who say, "Hey, I want to operate in these 9 markets." When it's okay, so I need to establish myself in 9 markets to operate in those 9 countries. What we find is they say, "Actually, we'll just pick the 3 biggest ones." Okay, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, for example. Because of the fact they have to establish in those things. So I think as harmonization has to present, an increase in productivity, trade, etc., particularly for some of the left behind in smaller countries.
Yeah, well, guys, we have 3-4 more minutes to go, and I wanted to put this in perspective because when we think about doing customer experience, especially in Latin America, we try to follow best practices from everywhere. Let's get the best technology. Let's get the CX certification. Let's get all the certification that we need to get. Let's have the best tool to do the integration. Let's do the training. We have the culture. We have all that set up. But we keep forgetting, that from the perspective in Latin America, you need to have the infrastructure. You need to have the logistics. You need to have the taxes. You need to have the pricing. You need to have this, multi-country border, logistics set up. So, global resources. That needs to be set up in place in order for you to have your foundation. So, if you are, a company who wants to expand in Latin America or want to do business in Latin America, want to bring your, like you said, augment your whatever you're doing overseas, that's what you need to think about it, because we usually, we use this CX word too loosely, but we forget that you need to have the infrastructure that we take for granted most of the time, like having a simple internet connection, as simple as that, and we forget that, and I think, and we can talk about people, process, data, all the good toys that we get out there. We don't have that infrastructure, you won't be able to provide good CX at the very end, so that's probably the takeaway that I'm taking from here today.
Yeah.
I'll let you guys say the last words.
No, I'm going to let Craig have the last word, and the only thing I'm going to say is, like, I think that the challenges presented by Latin America, and you said at the beginning, Craig, is unlike any other place in the world, like Asia, Europe, and so forth. But I think that the value proposition is different because of the common culture and the approach that people have to life in Latin America being different from other parts of the world, right? But I'll let you, Craig, have the last words, and what do you think is the best value proposition for CX development in Latin America?
Sure, look, there is a value proposition down here. The simple thing is companies need to understand the environment which they'll be operating within, accepting what those challenges are, and then more importantly, having a plan to overcome them. Yes, there are some fundamental inputs to CX, such as internet connection, etc. But the reality is most of those challenges, and if not 100%, can be overcome, which presents an opportunity for those looking to enhance, improve, and to thrive. So I think there's a great opportunity. It's simply a matter in those words of grasping that opportunity and running with it.
Perfect. So it has been Jesús Hoyos de CRM Latinoamérica, Conversaciones de CRM, episodio 60. Today we had, that was the Spanglish there, came up, I don't know why.
We call it Latin English.
The Spanglish, Porto Spanglish, that's another language that we need to learn, with Esteban Kolsky, SAP Chief Evangelist of CX, Craig Dempsey, CEO of Biz Latin Hub. And as you know, this will be, recorded and will be posted on Instagram and on my podcast channels and, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter as well. Thank you very much, and see you next week. Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Don't go. Stay there.